So, hello everybody, welcome back again. It's a very messy table. I decided not to clean it up. In fact, I think it will be becoming worse over the next few days. And you might see that happening because I've been ordering quite a lot of stuff. So today I want to talk a little bit about, for the first time, about the software updates that we are getting from Sony. This is kind of a follow-up from a video I made 3 months ago, which was basically a very negative one, where I was talking about Sony's software problem. They just released version 2.0 at that time, and I was kind of worried about what was happening. And that video got quite a few likes, but also quite a few dislikes. I think it was about a third of the respondents were dislikes. Now, some of them, of course, because I was doing my normal unprepared sort of talking in bad English in too many words. But some of them was also because they didn't really get what I was trying to say. And the point I was trying to make is that, unlike with the hardware, where we've seen every generation improve and basically Sony reacting to reviewers and their ambassadors time and time again, and each version of the hardware became better, I and others have the feeling that they didn't do the same thing around software. So that's one of the topics today, and also the changes that I think are happening, and I think they are very exciting. So I want to talk to you about it, and hopefully you will stay for whatever the length of this video. Hopefully it will be less than 15 minutes, who knows. I already got a few beers down, so we don't know. But first I want to sort of get back to some of the claims I made that make me kind of happy that I was wrong. Because this week Sony, of course, released major software versions, or announced major software versions for the A7, the A7R3, the A9, and basically as a result of one of the new cameras, the A6400 that they released. And that kind of confirmed one of the claims, and kind of this how do you say this, confirmed, and one where I clearly failed in one of my predictions. So the first one was, I predicted quite a long time ago that Sony would start doing a TikTok sort of mechanism. And what I mean with that, was like Intel, for example, used to have like sort of a major release and then a soft release, a major release and then a soft release, and a sort of a two-step approach. My prediction when these cameras came out is that Sony would, for the first time, react in software once a Canon and Nikon, and by then they didn't know that also Panasonic would react, but mostly they would react in software to Canon and Nikon and not in hardware, simply because Sony was in the half of their development cycle. So they knew that Canon and Nikon would be coming out with a camera. They knew they could not quickly design something new, although some people think that designing a camera will take at least 18 months to 2 years, right? It's probably already in the planning, and I doubt if any other company like Canon and Nikon has any effect on the hardware that's coming up from Sony, not in that time frame. So I kind of predicted that the reaction to the Nikon and the Canon would come in software, and I guess that really happened, and I'm very happy to see that, because now for the first time we are seeing very serious updates to some of their cameras, especially the A9, which kind of gets two steps sort of rolled into one. And the first one is basically it's getting all the features, which are about 10 or 11, that the A7R3 and the A7 III already had. They're getting now put back into the A9, but on top of that it gets quite a lot of new features, where they basically, I think they are doing two things. A, they are setting the bar even higher and also making clear, hey, we are not going to release an an A9 Mark II anytime soon. You will have to wait for a while, but here you have a massive update, and we feel, and I think rightly so, this is now still the best camera out there. It's now clearly, for example, in autofocus better than a D850. It's better than any of the mirrorless cameras that are now out in almost any way that you look at it. So for a camera that's already 2 years out, clearly they had this plan already, and you can see the TikTok I was sort of talking about, right? So the first reaction there was in software, and only next year they will react, probably just before the Olympics, they will react with a new version of the hardware. Which I won't talk about in this video, but I am more than willing to talk about in the next video again. The A7 III and the A7R3 are going to get software updates, but they are not as aggressive yet, in a way. In a way it's amazing, because they are going to add two features, one that I predicted was not possible, and the other one I kind of predicted. They are going to improve the IAF into the camera. So they updated, one of the stronger points was IAF. There were still some issues with it, let's say it like that, but clearly once they saw that what Canon brought out, which was basically nothing, and what Nikon brought out was, or the other way around, sorry, Canon kind of added it a bit, Nikon didn't add it at all, but they now promise both to improve their IAF, and Sony sort of put some extra pressure on them by releasing a new version of their eye tracking mechanism, basically for all their cameras. It will be released for the new A6400, the A7 III, the A7R3 and the A9. Maybe not all at the same level of quality, but definitely all better than whatever the others are doing. The one that's probably closest is going to be Fuji, and even then I doubt that they can get close. The difference, I think, is that and again, let me first say the second thing I was clearly mistaken about is that I said that animal AF, so they showed already last year, and that's also part of my argument that they are jumping ahead of the competition. By the time that the competition has IAF working, they will be jumping to more, let's say, first animal detection and then object detection. Now, and if you watch their videos and presentations, you can see that they're already talking about both of these things. So object recognition to make the tracking better, so shapes, colors, depth information, combining them all to make the tracking better. And on the eye detection, they're starting to add animal detection. I predicted that it would not be possible in the current hardware, and they had to add an extra piece of hardware into the new cameras, and that IAF for animals would come later. I'm very happy to see that I was wrong, and they will reintroduce or introduce the animal tracking in the A7 III, the A7R3, the A9 and the A6400. I think that's amazing. It also tells you, in my opinion, once they start updating to the new hardware, which might happen in the A7S3 or the one after that, that let's say the troubles for the others are even bigger, because I think with more power behind some of these technologies, it will become even better. So the second thing that I was predicting, and I think was, and this is not about that was I right or wrong, but just to sort of set the stage for what I'm going to talk about next. The second thing that I found very interesting in the presentations that you might have missed is that they are indeed pushing back quite aggressively to the claims of Canon and Nikon and now also Panasonic with the L mount, that the mount on the Sony's is too small. And they actually show some very interesting graphs, which I will link to in the description, showing what are, I wouldn't say the facts, but at least what Sony is claiming is the truth, and they're probably going to prove it by releasing lenses, or at least in their ecosystem having lenses that do at least what the others are doing. So and they are calling this, and I have already saw before, and I think they will push it more and more, they're one mount for all principle. So they're one mount which they are using for APS-C photography, full frame photography, movie making, let's say at the normal level, but also filmmaking. So the really high-end cameras are now all using the same mount. Sorry for the A mount people, but Sony now clearly has one mount, and that's a major advantage compared to the others. And the argument that the others are trying to make in that, well, but the mount sucks because it's too small, they are pushing back to that point quite strongly. So let's see what else is on my list. Yeah, about the new software, I think, let me first jump in before you might already have left. If that's the case, I'm sorry. What I will do is, because I'm not going to talk about all the features and what is good or what is bad, because I don't have access to the cameras, and I think there are a few people who have hit on important points in these discussions. There are already many reviews about the software releases and what's good and what's bad about them. And what I will do is I will link in this description a few that I really like for different reasons. I think Tony, and I will only call them by their first name because otherwise I might misspell or mispronounce their last names. But Tony and Chelsea just released a video which I think is very interesting, where they compare real comparison, the different brands and the different versions of the new IAF or eye tracking. I think it was very interesting. I think Max had a really interesting video about the video aspects of the A6400 and what it will probably also mean for the future. I think Patrick Murphy had a really, together with Brian, I think only Brian and Patrick probably had access, and some of these people I talked to, I wouldn't say on a regular basis, but I've communicated with them over Facebook, and most of them are quite nice people. And I think Brian and Patrick are the only one who have had access earlier than the others to some of the firmware, and they have played more with it. So I will also link two of their videos, and especially also a blog that Brian Smith made, because he is hinting that there's more coming. And that was the kind of the last point I want to make. So there are some claims, and I think it's not a claim, it's basically what Sony is saying, that the A9 is getting two updates. So it's getting basically a version 5.0 and a version 6.0. And the A7 III and the A7R3 are not getting one of the most important new features, which is a new version of the object tracking, now called AF1, which works but is kind of sucky, to be fair. And they are replacing it with a very, very interesting new tracking mode. And that's only announced for the A6400 and for the A9. I predict that there will be a second firmware release for the A7 III and for the A7R3 that also will include this new feature. I think the only reason that they are not announcing it because they don't have to yet. They can, again, there's two reasons. A, they only announced their roadmap for about half a year, and like it or not, but the software team can only do so much. So I think it probably will happen after the summer if it happens. And there's no reason for them to announce this already. they can just sit back and wait what Canon and Nikon are doing this year. Because clearly, in my opinion, although the Nikon is probably doing a better job than the Canon, to be fair, but both of them got a lukewarm sort of reception, and there's no need for Sony to already prove that there's more power hidden in the current A7 III and the A7R3. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I'm guessing, since the A6400 can do it, and the A9 can do it, that the A7 III and the A7R3 can probably also do a pretty good job with the new algorithm, which is replacing the AF on function. And they are just holding it back. And in the blog that Brian Smith wrote, he's, I wouldn't say hinting at it, but at least he's saying more software is coming. So we are seeing a new Sony in that way, a little bit more like Fuji, which we were all hoping. So that's interesting. So I predict that we will see another one coming, and I think we will get, wouldn't say all the features of the A9, but I think there will be more than now announced. I think the background FTP is a very interesting one. I think the object tracking is probably another one that they will introduce in the A7 III and the A7R3. I might be alone in thinking this, but that's my prediction. Now the last thing I want to talk about, and maybe it's the most important thing, so it's not, so we're already 16 minutes in, so sorry about that, but it's the last topic, because remember that my first video was a little bit about the problem that I had with Sony's, let's say, communication between the reviewers, the ambassadors and their software team, at least from an outsider, right? I can't really tell for sure, but what I've heard is that unlike for the hardware, where there was clearly a nice sort of communication loop going on, and we saw improvement every time, whatever people were complaining, they fixed most of the problems in the hardware now. And there were silly sort of bugs staying in the software. A good one that we all know is the bug that if you use the drag with your finger, the focus becomes an orange dot. If you use the joystick, it doesn't. That's clearly a small bug feature that they could have fixed, and they've been told this 1,000 times and they are not doing it, right? So that's interesting. So I was talking to one of the Sony ambassadors, and by now we also have a pretty big Facebook group, as you probably know. So if you're not part of it, please join it. It's called the A7 III, A7R3 setup tips, and there are several Sony ambassadors there. And one of them I was talking with, and he told me that he will have a meeting with the Sony software team to talk about some of these issues. That was before the announcement this week, but I'm pretty sure it will still happen, and it kind of also shows maybe that Sony is changing their stance on how they want to communicate from the reviewers and the ambassadors to the software team. And I think that's very good news. And as a result, and that's kind of my last point here, I, together with him, with the Sony ambassador that if you join our Facebook group, you will know who it is, but I won't tell you here who it is. I know that, well, probably before we are done, multiple of them will be involved, but on our Facebook group we are actually making a list, and I will link this document probably in the description. We are making a link of fixes that we think should be implemented in, or we hope they will implement in software version 3.0, which might already be fixed in feature list, maybe. It's announced for April. So maybe, we don't know, but maybe in the version 4.0, which I think will be coming for the A7 III and for the A7R3, some of these things can be fixed. So what I am doing together with some other people in our Facebook group is, let's say, pre-filter and try to write out as many of the smaller and some bigger, but mostly smaller bug fixes that we would like to see Sony implement. And we will give that to the Sony ambassador I am talking about, who will have a meeting that's already set up with the Sony people in Japan. Does that mean that it will happen? No. Does it mean that anything of our list will be implemented? No. But at least there's an opening, and yeah, we want to try. So yeah, I will post this list. If you're not part of our Facebook group yet, maybe it's a good idea to join, because what I'm doing is every day I post 1 or 2 of these requests that we have with a solution, and people comment on it, and we will take up these comments, improve the description of the problem and how we would like Sony to fix it. And this might be or will be an input file that can be used during the meeting, or at least can be merged with some of the topics that he will be talking about with them. And I hope he's willing, and I think he's willing, that even if the discussion doesn't go the way as planned, or you never know how these meetings go, right? That he is willing to leave a PDF file or a printout version of our request at the software team. So yeah, that's about it for this video, which turned out to be 22 minutes. Well, then last thing, and I think Max was not the first one. Actually, it was Justine which reported that first, but Max confirmed it. And he also asked about it. One thing that we still have to be careful with the A6500 that I'm now using to record it, to make sure that we don't hit this 30-minute limit. The good news is on all new cameras, this limit will be gone. So the A6400 will not have a recording limit of 30 minutes anymore. Now the bad news is it won't be coming to any of the other cameras, because within the European law only new products are able to follow these new rules. So we have to wait for updates, unless they find a really weird way around it. We have to wait for updates, for example, for the A6500, before the limit on the 30-minute recording will be dropped. I jokingly suggested that maybe they can do something that Pentax did, is that you bring in your camera to Sony, they change a little bit, give it a new name tag, call it an A7RB or something, and maybe then they can do it. But I doubt that that will happen. But the good news is that on all, as far as we know, so the A7R3 would be a perfect example, it won't have a 30-minute recording limit anymore. Since the cheapest one, so the A6400, which will be replacing, in my opinion, the A6000 and the A6300, so the base version of the APS-C Sony camera does not have a recording limit anymore. And I think that's also very good news. So I will link most of these articles I liked, or reviews that I liked, into the description. Hopefully already today, otherwise tomorrow. So if they're not there yet, please visit again tomorrow. And yeah, if you have not seen them, might be useful. Okay, see you in the next one. Bye bye.